Hi, I'm Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report. What do they say about appeasers? They feed the crocodile, hoping that the crocodile will eat them last. Well, throughout the last 10 years, the banks have been appeased, and the crocodiles are feasting. Stacy.
Well, Max, everybody in the world is worried about World War III coming because we have Donald Trump, and they think, well, there might be a war with Iran, or there might be a war with China, or he's going to dismantle NATO, and then there's going to be a war with Russia and all this sort of stuff. Well, what people are forgetting is that one of the biggest trading bloc in the world, Eurozone, is still under pressure from the Italian banks, from the from the Greek economy, and from the biggest bank in the world in terms of a derivatives book. Here is a special report from Bloomberg, how Deutsche Bank made a $462 million loss disappear. It says a dubious trade leads to a criminal trial for Europe's most important bank. While everybody is looking at all the mad, crazy stuff that Donald Trump is doing and hypothesizing and making up stories and conspiracy theories and real facts about what he's doing, here we have a criminal trial in Italy happening about the biggest bank in the world, Deutsche Bank, how they helped hide $462 million of bad debt from Monte dei Paschi, the oldest bank in the world, and this is happening now.
Right. Deutsche Bank, we've talked about them a few times, that they are technically insolvent, and they're only kept alive through fraud, accounting tricks, and appeasement by government regulators who believe that, like the crocodile, if they appease Deutsche Bank, somehow they will escape the ravages of this huge banking institution going belly up. I don't see how that's not going to happen. Stacy.
So this case that's happening in Italy right now traces back to December 1st, 2008. Most of the world's banks were still panicking through the financial crisis. Lehman Brothers had collapsed. Merrill Lynch had been sold. Citigroup and others had required multi-billion-dollar bailouts to survive. But not every institution appeared to be in free fall. That afternoon at the London outpost of Deutsche Bank, the stolid-seeming €2 trillion German powerhouse, a group of financiers met to consider a proposal from a team led by a trim 40-year-old banker named Michel Fasola. He was a scion of an Italian banking family. Fasola was the head of Deutsche's Global Rate Unit, a division that had created and sold financial instruments tied to interest rates. So one of their clients, Monte dei Paschi, he said, well, there's a $462 million loss on their book, and he created a derivative, basically, which would book a profit in front and spread losses over time. And this is what is now coming back to hurt them. There was one guy in the room, William Brocksmith, German name, but he was actually born in Chicago, raised in Chicago, was working in London, and there are emails showing he was saying this is going to be a disaster, it's going to come back to bite us, I'm not sure this is legal. Now we're going to find out.
Yeah, well, it's clearly a case of financial engineering that we've covered many times before, where bankers come in and they create derivative products based on theoretical values and value at the market, value at the margin, value based on kind of a quantum physics approach that this exists only under certain conditions, that the wind has to be blowing at a certain speed and the population of India has to be increasing at a certain rate and the moon has to be in a certain phase, and then we'll say it's worth X, and then 10 years later it's worth Y, and it's a complete nonsensical. There's no regulations against it, so they'll say it's technically illegal because it's like saying that I stole plutonium from an ant, but it's technically illegal, but it's not really illegal, but I'm going to get away with it anyway and I'm going to call that a derivative, and it's worth $1 billion, and try to sue me for it. Of course it's not legal, and of course Deutsche Bank was the go-to bank for the toxic sludge from other banks to temporarily find residency, and hoping that over 5 or 10 years the global economy would improve to an extent that the taxable revenue from various countries would be enough to offset all this debt. Remember, in the 2008 to 2010 period, I remember this, I pulled this out of my desk. This is, if you recall, a pack of terrorist financial terrorist playing cards, which was modeled on the, remember the 52 cards that were created after the Iraq War, or during the Iraq War, for the terrorist playing cards. And somebody made up these terrorist financial playing cards, and they have Alan Greenspan and others. And the sentiment back then was that these guys needed to be taken out. And I'm heartened by the rhetoric of Donald Trump, who talked about summary execution of enemies, throwing people in Guantanamo Bay on a whim. I hope that he revisits the names of these folks and the people at Deutsche Bank. If he really wants to get Germany to fall in line and stop currency manipulating, as he suggests, put Deutsche Bank bankers in jail or decapitate them. You've got the power, Donald. Use it. Don't be all talk and no go, baby.
The hashtag Muslim ban, it should be hashtag derivatives ban, because here is what they're saying about this derivatives disaster. Remember, Deutsche Bank has the biggest derivatives book in the world, even bigger than JP Morgan's, and it says the bank's deal with Passkey is a microcosm of Deutsche's embrace of derivatives, questionable accounting, and slow walking of regulators have eroded the market's trust to the point that no one really knows how close the company is to the edge. So this is important going forward, is what are the real risks that we're facing in the global economy? Still nobody knows. After all these years of all this financial crisis, when all these regulators, including BaFin, who is the German regulator, have been looking at these banks to find out what is there, and they have supposedly been making it better. But here they're saying that nobody knows what any of these derivatives are. Nobody knows how much fraud it's actually tied to or covering up.
Well, to put it in terms that Trump would understand, this is a tax-deferred loss or a tax loss carry-forward that hasn't been declared. It's an undeclared tax loss carry-forward called Deutsche Bank. Trump had to declare his tax loss carry-forward. That's why he didn't pay taxes for 10 or 15 or 20 years, because of that massive loss. He took almost $900 million, I believe it was at the time. Deutsche Bank has a similar loss, except it's in multi-billions of dollars. They've put the entire global economy at risk, and they've rolled that loss forward, not declared it. It's hidden in the global derivatives market and the shadow banking system, and they are financial terrorists, Trump. You're against terrorism. Step up to the plate, or put your pants back on, because you're nothing.
Well,
you're nothing.
Well,
unless you go after these guys, you're nothing, Trump. You're nothing. You're nothing but a bag of wind, hot air. Come on, baby. Let's see what you got. Go after the real terrorists, Trump. No? Oh, I see. Then maybe you are. Just go and grab some woman's genitalia, because you're worthless unless you go after the real terrorists, Trump. Full stop.
So, cut back to the story. It's happening in Italy. We know in Italy they have to examine any sort of mob, sort of mafia, sort of gangster conspiracy, and this is what they're doing. They're investigating it there. Now, the BaFin report that I told you, that they started to investigate Deutsche Bank and find out what happened in this December 2008 meeting. Fasola, the guy who actually, according to witnesses, is the one that came up with this derivative, he doesn't even recall the event. He doesn't recall the meeting that he led. William Brocksmith, the guy who was at the meeting, was the head of the London desk of Deutsche Bank. The head of risk management. He was against it, but the day before the audit started, run by BaFin, according to Deutsche Bank, on January 26, 2014, the day before the audit began, Brocksmith's body was found at his London home, hanging from a dog leash. This is something that you often see with people involved with Italian banks. We saw that back in the 80s or 90s when somebody was found swinging from the Blackfriars Bridge in London. Well, he was found swinging from hung in his home. They said he committed suicide about the stress of this Deutsche Bank situation. So I'm assuming, Bloomberg just asked, we don't know how close to the edge Deutsche Bank is, but if the head of risk management on the day of an audit commits suicide, you can bet that is pretty bad.
Yeah, well, look, let's return to senile Trump for a second. He's all about this job growth. He claims that deregulation is needed to create jobs so people can borrow money. No, senile Trump. Here's the situation. People are not lending money at the banks because they're hoarding the cash to pay these bad derivatives bet they made to bail themselves out during the 2008 crisis. You want to really differentiate yourself from Obama? Then hold the bankers to account and force them to declare bankruptcy, because they're, like, Deutsche Bank is insolvent. Okay, senile Trump, if you don't understand that, then you're not the businessman that you pretend to be. or recapitalize the banks or create new banks. And the fact that they're killing themselves, again, harkens back to other previous banking scandals. There's been a lot of banker suicides in the last couple of years because in their hearts they know that they've committed massive fraud. They've put the global economy in jeopardy. It's time for senile Trump to step up and apply justice. Trump.
Well, as we know, Angela Merkel, who's the Chancellor of Germany, has been very tough on the ECB and the European Commission about doing anything to alleviate the austerity and crisis in Greece. So many are looking to see what she does regarding Deutsche Bank and when or if this blows up. But there was another interesting story last week that, of course, Trump occupies all the headlines, but I found this really quite interesting. This was an open letter from Yanis Varoufakis, who has been on the show many times before he became a rock star economist and became the finance minister of Greece, before he stepped down because Tsipras, the prime minister of Greece, did a deal with the Troika that was going to be stupid and destroy the economy. So here he wrote an open letter to Tsipras. Varoufakis calls Tsipras to prepare for breaking the deal with Greece's creditors. First of all, he says that deal that Tsipras did with the Troika back in 2015, 2014, he said because of him, with his stance, Tsipras sank Podemos in Spain, made an approach with the collapsing ethically and politically social democracy party, disappointed the progressive Europeans, and all these happened at the same time where nationalism triumphs everywhere. So he's basically blaming Tsipras for the left wing basically losing their momentum, because remember at that time it wasn't all about the right-wing parties leading the way, it was the left-wing parties. Podemos, Syriza in Greece were rising up and providing an answer, a response to neoliberalism and austerity and all these sort of private equity sort of model of extractive capital.
Right. Greeks had voted to say no to the Troika, say no to the EU. They were ready to take back their sovereignty, take back their country, bring back their own currency, as we recommended. But instead, the government overruled the will of the people. They ushered the door in for a collapse of any balancing political effort to create some ballast to the right-wing extremism, open the door to a Trump, which, okay, we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But if he's not going to go after terrorists like Deutsche Bank, then he's not worth the salt that occupies his skin, and we have to...
Okay, but let's go quickly in the last minute here. I want to turn to what the Varoufakis says here that I hadn't ever noticed and hadn't been aware of. And it's really important to the currency wars, sort of, you know, how a smaller power like Greece can use leverage in an asymmetric warfare way. Because he says that basically new austerity is supposed to be imposed on Greece. And he's saying, don't do it, back out. The reason why you capitulated last time was that they threatened to shut off, they did. They shut off our ATMs. So he says, quote, prepare the electronic system of transactions through TaxisNet, which I had designed. I had started building it and even announced it to the new Minister of Finance, Euclides Saklatos, when I delivered the ministry. Therefore, if indeed the Greek Prime Minister means it this time that he will not retreat, he should prepare for breaking the deal with the creditors so that to prevent it. The design of a parallel system for payments is ready since 2014, and he knows it. So a parallel system of payments is ready in Greece.
Any country that's not prepared to have a parallel system of payments in place is being, you know, willfully ignorant of the current situation.
Well, but, you know, the important thing about this is if Greece does that, then the whole Eurozone and the Euro monetary unit is basta, it's over, it's dead, because everybody else is going to follow, because Greece will flourish outside of that system.
Is this why Bitcoin's making new all-time highs? You're darn straight it is. Well, stay tuned for the second half, because we've got a lot more Satoshi coming your way.
People with stories to tell. Those who deserve to be heard. Studied inside out, but still with unrevealed secrets. Leaders, politicians, thinkers, and witnesses. They're here to speak. Are you there to hear?
These are the inmates at a children's prison in Australia. They've committed no murder, no rape, and no terror attack.
They had no running water. The only water in the cell was in the toilet.
No air conditioning, no fans.
This is barbarism. This is inhumanity. This is child abuse.
Cruelty is the accepted way to correct bad boys here.
I'm sorry, are we in Australia here?
It's gut-wrenching, isn't it? I don't believe it's happening anywhere else in the developed world, this sort of treatment of young people.
This was a children's prison. Staff in adult prisons are better trained.
They're being shackled to chairs, a la Guantanamo Bay. This is actually happening in Australia in 2016. So it's not an accident, it's not inadvertence, it's not indifference, it's a deliberate policy that has led to the catastrophe.
About your sudden passing, I've only just learned. You wore yourself thin, taking your last wrong turn. Your act got up to you as we all knew it would. I'd tell you I'm sorry, if only I could. So I write these last words in hopes to put to rest these things that I never got off my chest. I remember when we first met, my life turned on each breath. But then my feelings started to change. You talked about war like it was a game. Still, some were fond of you, those that didn't like to question or argue. And I secretly promised to never be like you. It's said one does not leave a funeral the same as one enters. A mind gets consumed with death, but this one quite differs. I speak to you now because there were no other takers. To proclaim that mainstream media has met its maker.
Arturo promises his mother to find out where the money is.
Very good question.
He goes on a journey to meet some smart people to enlighten him.
When you learn about it, something happens. You get mad, you get furious, you get angry, and you begin to realize we have to change this. We have to protest this.
What does he find out?
Los mayores problemas que hoy existen en nuestro país no son económicos, son políticos.
A story not as comic as it may seem. Will Arturo finally say, I know where the money is, Mum?
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go to Trond Andresen from Norway. which twice voted no to joining the EU in 1972 and 1994. Trond was very active in both of those no campaigns. Trond, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so back in the 1970s, being anti-EU was the position of most left-wing parties in Europe, certainly in the UK. What was the left wing's argument back then regarding Europe, Trond?
Well, I think the left-wing argument was national sovereignty, but not in a chauvinistic way. So it's like, let us in our country do our stuff and decide all our matters, and let us let other countries do the same, and then we can cooperate and be nice to each other.
All right, so Trond, let's talk about today, because today an anti-EU position is now considered a far-right position. Certainly the most vocal supporters are Marine Le Pen, Geert Wilders, for example. So how did that happen?
That's very strange, but it has always been like that, I think, because the strongest EU resistance in Scandinavia was and is mostly on the left and center. And I know that the EU resistance, especially in the UK, is sort of dominated by the Tories. So that's a sort of national difference. I'm not sure why that is.
Okay, so that's an interesting topic there because, of course, in America, we have Donald Trump, and he very much talks about being anti-globalism and anti what some call the New World Order. So is there an agreement with what Trump is saying here, or is that impossible given the full body of all of his rhetoric to really agree with anything? What do you think?
Well, I would not like to be sort of made a partner of Donald Trump, but some stuff that he's saying, I think it's okay. If he wants to sort of revive American industrial production with a little protectionism, I think that's fair.
Sure. So, again, it's a lot of information coming from the White House, coming from Donald Trump. There seems to be, in the liberal class anyway, the left-wingers, for the most part, are pretty determined to put out an anti-Trump message, and it fits with what's happening also in the UK. We see this Brexit vote. Some would say, and my point is that there's a lot of mixed information here. Some consider this Brexit voters somewhat racist and xenophobic. Is that part of the Brexit vote, or what is your view there?
Well, you know, I live in Norway, not in the UK, but what I have been able to gather is that the most important reason for the Brexit vote was national sovereignty, that they wanted that the laws that applied to Britain was going to be made by the British Parliament. And the so-called xenophobia was a secondary issue, as I understand it from polls after the referendum. And I also understand it like people do not hate dark-skinned immigrants, but they feel the impact of jobs disappearing. So I find that, I think I can understand that seen from our position here in Norway. But the social situation is worse in the UK than in Norway.
I want to go back a couple of years now. During the height of the crisis in Greece, it really looked like the EU, IMF, and the ECB, the European Central Bank, the so-called Troika, were really ganging up on Greece and trying almost to destroy Greece. And across Europe, my question is, in countries like Norway and other European countries, was this the perception that the EU was unfairly attacking Greece, and did this leave an additional bitter taste in people's mouths about the EU and these other institutions?
Well, I think Norwegian opinion is divided along the traditional left-right lines here. Norwegian people on the right would say that the Greeks really deserved to learn to not be corrupt and not live above their means. But I think that the center and left in Norway feel that they were really being made an example of to punish them. So to show the rest of Europe that if you don't toe the line to the troika, you will really get a beating.
All right, now let's move on to something that's quite fascinating. Your work. For those that do want to save the Eurozone, you propose replacing the euro with a bancor. So can you give us some background? What is the bancor? How will it save the EU? Trond.
Yeah, well, this is history. We are going back to 1944, the Bretton Woods Conference, where John Maynard Keynes, 2 years before he died, represented the UK with a proposal which was his invention. And that was to create a World Bank, which was going to call the International Clearing Union. And this was going to issue a world currency called the banker. And the interesting point is that, seen from my sort of control engineer position, that was a very clever idea, because he wanted to balance trade between countries so that we wouldn't get a sort of Germany-Greece situation we have in Europe today. And he would do that by making all international trade in the global currency banker, and countries that got a surplus in their account at the ICU, they was to be punished by paying interest on their surplus. And also the deficit countries would also pay interest on their loans. That's the regular thing that you do today if you have to take up a loan with a bank. But the surplus countries were also going to be punished. And also, if you were not able to get rid of your surplus, like Germany have today, then you're going to be punished additionally by the ICU forcing the exchange rate upwards, so that you had to appreciate your currency. And of course, the other way around, the deficit countries would, after some years, if they were not able to get out of it, they would have to devalue their currency. And this would make exports from Germany, we use that as a metaphor, less attractive in other countries, and exports from Greece, again a metaphor, more attractive to other countries, so that you will get a balancing of the economies, and rich countries would not, in that sort of environment, be able to amass enormous financial claims on other countries by having a sort of systematic trade surplus over many, many years.
Right. Well,
so,
when you talk about this, what struck me just now actually is something I've been talking about for a while, and what you've just said has triggered my thoughts on this again. What I wanted to say was that one of the problems in capitalism, the way it's practiced today, is that if you have a lot of wealth, your cost of borrowing goes down. And so that makes it easier for you to accumulate even more wealth. But as you just described it with the bancor, if you have surplus capital, then the interest charged on that capital goes up. So isn't that correct? And that sounds very elegant, a very elegant solution.
Yes, and when Keynes came up with this in a couple of articles during the war before the conference, it was very well received, and it was considered a very clever idea. But he lost out at Bretton Woods because the United States, of course, wanted the US dollar as a world reserve currency, and they were able to get that sort of solution. So what I say today is make the euro into a bancor for the Eurozone region, and make the ECB into an ICU for the Eurozone solution region. And that means that the Eurozone will hopefully be able to balance their economy much better than today's dire situation, where things are completely hopeless after, say, 8 or 9 years of crisis.
Now, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, has a bank, and they have a currency, a global currency, called the Special Drawing Right, or the SDR. How does it contrast, how does it differ from the bancor, if you have a view on that?
Well, I'm not very familiar with the SDR, so I will not say much about that. But the clever idea about the bancor is that you force the surplus countries symmetrically to also adjust their economies, not only put the burden on the deficit countries.
Okay, well, then let's go backwards in time a little bit. The Bancor, as you point out, at the Bretton Woods Conference after World War II, eventually what was agreed upon was that the world reserve currencies would trade against the dollar, and the dollar at that point was backed by gold. So there was still an idea that gold played a role in international commerce. And of course, gold would, under the gold standard, the classical gold standard, this is the way countries balance their books. If they accumulated too much gold, they had to sell it off, and vice versa. So, in other words, the Bancor harkens back to a gold standard, but in a lot more elegant way without having to move around a lot of heavy metal. What do you think of this idea?
Well, I'm not a big fan of the gold standard. I don't think it's necessary either, because modern fiat money is more or less based on its values based on the strength of the economy that backs this currency and the ability to tax the money back by the state. But I think the interesting point here is that the EU elite, which are sort of very married to the idea of an economic union and even more integration, they will get to keep their euro, they will get to keep their beloved European Central Bank, but they have to accept that countries should be able to issue their own currency again. And that, I think, is a very big thing for them to swallow, but that would really solve the solve the problem, because then the depressed countries can issue the amount of money and inject it into their economies to get the national economy moving again.
Very good. Trond, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thank you, and thanks for having me.
All right, and that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacey Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Trond Andresen. If you'd like to get in touch on Twitter, it's Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.